Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Creator Circle. I'm your host, Lucy, and today we are here with special guest Lindsay. Lindsay is owner, founder, trainer, all the things of Divine Canine Ranch. And without further ado, I will let her tell you a little bit more about herself and what she does. So, welcome, Lindsay.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I do own a dog training company. I've been training for about 5 years. My husband Andrew recently joined me at the beginning of this year, so we're now officially family owned. We specialize in behavior modification and obedience from puppies to adult dogs, aggressive dogs. So we do a wide range of just helping owners coexist a little bit more. With their dogs, making sure that everybody's happy and that dogs stay in their homes.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you've been doing this for about 5 years. I know you grew up with a lot of animals and dogs in particular. What led you to pursue dog training as a career?
Yeah, I did grow up with quite a few animals. My mom was one of those where, if she saw an animal on the street, it was ours forever. She wasn't going to rehome it. That was our animal. And then we had a couple different, exotic species as well who, came and went. And my aunt Ellen, she was a dog trainer for a long time, many years ago. So I always kind of grew up around this idea that dog training was a thing. But I actually started in sign language interpreting. I did that for quite a few years, studied that in high school, went to college for a couple of years, and it was fun and I really enjoyed it. I was very good at it, but I don't know, it just really wasn't my calling. I didn't wake up every day excited to go to college and study and this and that. So my husband now, but a boyfriend at the time, we were sitting there, like, what can I do? I don't know what I want to do, but I know it's not sign language interpreting. And so we came up with, well, what about the dog training? Obviously, I know a lot about dogs, grew up with them. And so I ended up going to a vocational school for dog training, Animal Behavior College. And it was a half online, half in person with a mentor for probably 2 years. I did that. And then I started working at doggy daycares, working very closely with hundreds of dogs before starting my own company.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of people feel the same way. They wake up in the morning, they're like, I don't want to do what I'm doing, but they don't have the ambition and really the courage to say, well, how can I do different and what can I do that will make me happy? So that's very cool. And it's awesome that you get to work with dogs all day. I'm sure you don't feel the same way all the time, but I imagine just being with my dog all day and I would love it.
Oh yeah, man, it definitely is a lot of fun. The owners are the hard part. I got into it thinking I would spend all day with dogs, and it actually revolves heavily around training the owners how to keep up with it. So it was a bit of a shock getting into that, but I do enjoy what I do, and I think that was kind of the goal getting into it. I am, rather good at it as well, if I, can say myself. So, definitely I think it worked out. And we just recently started running a board and train. So we're kind of getting to that next level of being able to really make some changes for dogs.
Yeah, and I think as opposed to going to some big facility or corporation, like the ones that are national or even just local facilities where there's a huge team, you don't always know who's going to be working or seeing or taking care of your dog personally. And on this level, you do, and you know that you can trust the individual. And I think it gives owners not only a sense of relief that they can enjoy if they're away or they can trust you with their dog, but it's just an added level of this is going to work out well. You know what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, without calling names, there definitely are places out there where you can get cheap training, private lessons, group classes. The issue with corporate is, there's a big divide right now in the dog training community between correction based training and R plus is what they call it, where it's like, fear free training. And so corporate, does lean heavily on the R plus side. But, when you have a dog who has major behavioral issues, it's very difficult for a person to use 100% treat training to, or even toy training, whatever it is, to get a dog, especially like really aggressive dogs, to make this transformation. It's not impossible, and we do rely heavily on treat training in our own training, but some dogs just need a little bit of proper use of corrections to say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore, but we're going to do this, and here's a treat if you do something I like. And so those two, just like raising kids, there's got to be consequences and punishment. There has to be reinforcement and good job, this is what I want. And so when you go to corporate, a lot of times these trainers are they're being told what kind of training they can do, what kind of equipment is allowed. And so a lot of times when you do go to these big corporates, I have had a lot of clients come to me and say, oh, well, I did training here and we didn't get a whole lot out of it. So, we try to specialize in doing it right the first time and kind of being the only trainer you're going to need. And this, so you're not going out and spending a whole bunch of money for different trainers, really not seeing any progress.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was actually going to ask, I was going to say that I know in many communities of all different kinds, there's always a difference of opinions. And I wondered, in the dog training community, were there any, large points of disagreement in methodology and things like that? So it's interesting that you bring it up, and it makes a good point. Like, one, obviously, we don't want to be spending this money time and time after just to end up with no result, right? And then two, it's, I'm sure, confusing and complicated for the animal to do this, 3 or 4 different times, however, whatever, and learning from different people and having to get introduced to different people and learning different ways. It's would be so much easier, not only on the family that's taking care of the dog, the owners, but then also the dog itself, I'm sure, to be able to say, this is what I need to know and this is how I do it, and not learn it 4 different ways. So
Right. Absolutely. I think I have a lot of clients call and they say, I've already spent X amount of money on trainers and I have all of this equipment. They've got boxes worth of equipment, and they feel defeated because I am their, third, fourth, fifth trainer over the course of 2 to 5 years. I just finished training a very reactive dog who 7 years old, had been through training since he was 2. This poor client had been through 4 trainers, I think, in that time frame. And it took us, because the dog was 7, it did take us about 6 months to actually get this dog where he needed to be. But the good thing about Andrew and I is I started in a school that was R+. They wanted to make sure we were only using reinforcement. Then I took it upon myself to further my education in other forms of training and forms of equipment. So I usually make sure that I know how to use everything, how to make sure I can utilize equipment to do it right the first time. So we're not confusing dogs. I'm not having my clients spend thousands of dollars to train their dog. And I actually will normally give my clients equipment first, leave them with it for a while, make sure they're happy, and then I will have them get whatever equipment. But if we change what equipment we're going to be using halfway through, if we're going to be using changing equipment halfway through, we just want to make sure that we are making sure that the clients understand and the dogs are using it right, and that everybody feels comfortable before I have everybody. Money's a huge factor, and I don't want people spending tons of money and not getting anything out of it. Then they're defeated, the dogs are confused. So yeah, there's definitely a big divide, but I think too, it comes down to a lot of trainers don't want to learn any different. I have met a lot of trainers who are within the R+ community, and you can't really even have a conversation with a lot of them. They are like, nope, we're not even going to go into that. I don't agree with it. And so there's definitely a lot of trainers out there who either don't want to know any different, or corporate, who they work for, don't allow them to learn any different.
yeah, and I think, that bleeds industries. There's a lot of people who don't want to learn or hear anybody else's opinion or perspective. And whether or not that's right or wrong, I'm not one to say, but I think that especially when you're working with live animals, dogs, in this case, you can't just say one and done, this is going to work for everything and everybody. I think, each dog is unique. As you said, you've worked with someone or a dog now that's 7 and has gone through this a few times. So what if those weren't the right method or techniques? And just having the open mind to say, I can't know 100% that this is accurate all of the time. So there's a potential for me to do one thing one way and one thing another way. Um,
Right.
yeah, interesting.
Absolutely.
So what would you say that you think sets you apart or differentiates you from other dog trainers in the industry, and maybe apart from the fact that you're not strict on this is the only way to do it?
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it is because we're so well rounded in different techniques, we are able to suit a lot of different kinds of clients, making sure that, if somebody wants to use a certain equipment, that we understand how to use it and we can do that for them. But if somebody is having a hard time, they don't know how to train their dog, maybe they had a dog in the past and I get a lot of times, oh, my old dog responded to this, or my old dog never did this. And like you say, every dog is different. So I think us understanding a wider range of technique and use of equipment, it's easier for us to handle a lot of different kinds of dogs and kinds of clients. We also run a board and train in our home. And so it's a home environment. We have a nice backyard. We're able to go out into the community and train your dog out in public, making sure we have a little bit of public access where dogs are allowed. Um, and then the fact that we're family owned, we're not a huge corporation where you talk to a receptionist and you take payment there, and then you talk to your trainer and then a different trainer follows up with you. We're with you from the first time we speak to, you're happy with your results and you're comfortable with your dog. We're going to be with you every step of the way. It's just Andrew and I, nobody else messes with your dog. It's totally just us interacting and making sure that your dog is trained and on the right track. So I think that's the biggest difference in what we offer is it's just us. It's just us. We do have a wider range of knowledge, and we do train in a home environment, so it makes it a lot easier to train your dog for real life.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because you're very accommodating, or at least in my experience, and flexible to the rest of the world that's going around. People have jobs, they have other commitments, and they want to take care of and ensure that their dog is well trained, but sometimes it doesn't always fit the traditional offerings of whatever corporate classes and things like that that are out there. And so to have somebody that said, well, I'll come to you and I'll do it on your terms or in your environment to ensure that it's really all that more successful is a huge difference. It makes a big impact.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And even with our board and train, we have started doing that here in our home, but we'll come get your dog. Like, you don't have to drive them all the way down to us. A lot of our clients are in downtown Houston. We do live on the outskirts. So we will do coming to you, picking your dog up. All of the private lessons are done in your home. So even when we're done training, you're not going to come down to us. We will continue to train in your own environment. And we do offer just private lessons. If you want to be involved in 100% of your dog's training and you want to do it from the get-go, we come once a week to make sure that you feel supported and that we're figuring out what works best for your dog, so you're not frustrated on why is this not working, right? We come in, we say, this is how your dog responds, practice this for a week. So this way you can have that bonding time with your dog, but have that support of professionals who can help you feel a little less frustrated during that period.
Right. And frustration, I feel like, is a big key, especially in the space that you're in, because, you know, we love our dogs and we want to have this long lasting relationship with them, but it can be frustrating, especially if your needs are not being met and their needs are not being met. And so, I think it's interesting that you've taken on recently. I've seen you post a lot more about sort of like tips and industry knowledge on your channel. And I think it's really just refreshing to see somebody that's an expert in their field and willing to share their knowledge instead of just saying, no, like there's only one way to do it and I'm not going to consider any other opinion, or, and it's just refreshing to know that there's people who actually genuinely want to help for the purpose of helping the individual that may be different from a different situation.
Right, right, absolutely. Yeah, and it all does come down to that every dog is different. I can't sit here and as a professional and with the experience of that every dog is different, sit here and be like, it has to be done this way. So even during private lessons, I may run through four different kinds of ways to train the same thing, try different equipment all in an hour. The good thing about dogs is when you find something that works, it clicks quickly. You're going to know very, very soon within, 5 to 20 minutes of working it. If there's a little bit of progress, it works. But if you're sitting there and an hour has gone by and you have absolutely no progress, obviously something's not clicking. So every dog is different, and dogs are resilient in the fact that they're always able to recover, and they're going to show you what works pretty quickly after trying different techniques.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so you mentioned that you've, worked in different like in-house training for corporates and things like that. Have you ever worked and even in your role today, but have you ever worked with dogs who have suffered trauma of any kind? And have you know, developed or realized any sort of special needs case in those cases of how to start training? Because, dogs, we hear it all the time and it's really unfortunate, but when they're mistreated or they go through this excessive trauma, it can really impact them and change just their character from the very beginning. And so, owners that end up taking in rescues or dogs that have suffered, they have to adapt in a different way than if you start with a dog from the beginning. And so, what have you recognized in your work that has helped you overcome those kind of challenges?
Yeah, the good thing about dogs, and as I've said, is they are resilient. So a lot of times, even dogs who have suffered trauma, you hear it a lot where this dog has been abused, and yet they're the sweetest dog, right? And so dogs really are resilient. They do tend to bounce back, but there are some cases where if I get a dog who has suffered trauma, I have a specific example. I had a client call me, and their dog was in the back of a bed of a truck with the owner's, I don't know, dad or uncle or something like that. And the gentleman just put the dog in the truck. And as much as I hate that, people still do it. And of course, the gentleman got on the highway and the dog jumped out of the bed of the truck. So 60 miles an hour, broke every bone in this dog's body. By the grace of God, lived. Many surgeries, a lot of PT, years of learning how to walk and everything all over again. And then the client calls me and says, well, my dog is terrified of vehicles. I would assume so, right? I think if I went through that, I'd be a little scared to get back in a vehicle, right? And so with dogs like that, we talk about correction-based training where it is a form of positive punishment. I'm adding something uncomfortable into the environment to decrease unwanted behavior. But for dogs who are fearful, I do want to rely more heavily on that positive reinforcement, counter conditioning, saying, yes, I know you're afraid of this truck, but if you smell the truck, I'll give you a treat, right? If you kind of get near the truck, I'll give you a treat. So the dog starts to, view this thing that was once scary with something that is a little more positive. So definitely in our more fearful cases or traumatic dogs who have had injuries or issues with abuse and things like that, we probably would rely more heavily on the positive reinforcement side. But again, like if I get a dog who's aggressive because they were abused, I can't not correct the dog, just because of that. If they're being aggressive towards people, I do have to use some kind of correction to say, look, you can't be biting people. One, Texas is a 2-bite rule. They bite once, okay, they bite again, the dog has to be put down. So that's a life or death for dogs. I know the dog is scared, but we can't be biting people, one, so we correct that. But if you just look at a person without reacting, here's a treat, here's a bunch of reinforcement for behaviors that I do want. And very quickly, those two things together can definitely help. But every dog is different, and it's hard to say exactly what would work, but usually traumatic experiences, we do rely mostly or completely on positive reinforcement for those kinds of dogs. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's so sad to hear that story. Um, there's just no words, but
I
um,
know.
dogs they're little characters. I mean, I think about my dog, and I'm like, she's like a little person in there. She's got an attitude. She knows what she wants, and so it's they just become so much a part of our lives, and they're so personable. At least in my experience, that even when
Right.
dogs that are mistreated and they're put in those awful positions, if you come to them and you want to establish that bond and that trust so that then they'll listen to you and they'll work with you, and that's where we see the improvement, as opposed to just like throwing them into some system where you think that maybe something will happen but you're really hands off, you don't even know your trainer, all of those things. What's the likelihood that you're actually going to get any return on investment? Probably not great. uh,
Right. No, absolutely.
so yeah, that's really heartbreaking. But a question that I have, and it's more of an opinion, and so whatever you think, but I wonder. You mentioned aggressive dogs, and you mentioned in one particular case he was aggressive as a result of trauma. Do you find that in most dogs that the aggression comes from trauma? Because I feel like, at least in my experience, I don't see dogs as innately aggressive. Like they don't just come out that way. I feel like it's sort of the nature versus nurture thing. Are you bred to be that way, or are you taught to be that way as a result of your situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most dogs who are aggressive can be rehabilitated. There are very seldom cases where I would say, look, your dog definitely has some deep rooted issues. But 98% of the time, most aggressive dogs are aggressive due to fear. They're scared of something, they're uncomfortable. Maybe you have a protective breed and you're not a strong owner. And so your dog learned very early on that they do have to protect you because they don't trust that you can protect yourself. And when you have a dog with such caliber without any kind of training or off switch, it can turn into aggression. So sometimes nature plays a part where you have these German Shepherds or Dobermans that do become aggressive only because it's what they were bred to do, is to be protective. And as an owner, if you're not a strong owner, I don't normally recommend those breeds to people who have never had a dog like that or don't know training or don't have a heavy hand. And then sometimes, yes, a dog will go through trauma and will ultimately become aggressive due to that. But most of the time, with a strong owner and the right training, dogs can be rehabilitated. But I think people jump into saying, oh, my dog's aggressive, and they give up before seeking somebody out that can actually help. So with dogs who are aggressive, it's very important that you pick the right trainer, just to make sure that that trainer has the knowledge and the experience to actually help you, or it could end up being a waste of time, and your dog may ultimately have to be put down if it gets to a 2 bite state, or if it's too much for you to handle.
Wow. Yeah, and I didn't even know that that was a thing, the 2 bite rule. And so how does that, obviously there's some sort of reporting that has to happen in order for them to be aware that this is the second bite, right? So is that like individuals reporting, or do they go to the vet? How does that happen?
So usually the only way that your dog will be registered is if the person that your dog bites goes to the doctor or goes to the ER. As a healthcare provider, that provider does have to make a report that that dog did bite. So there's a lot of dogs out there who do bite, and there was no, they didn't go to the ER or whatever. So that dog, the first bite was not put on the record. But if the person does go to the ER, yeah, there will be an issue there.
And so obviously your role is to come in and to not only teach the dogs the new curriculum, whatever it may be, and then also provide the owners with the tools and the tactics to maintain that training throughout, their regular day-to-day life. So
Right.
apart from their role in maintaining it after the fact, is there anything that owners can do ahead of time to set their dogs up for success before they start training?
Yeah, we talk a lot about having like a schedule for your dog and making sure there's an expectation there. So a lot of people will say, oh well, my dog has a strict schedule. We're up at 9 and this and that and that. you know that's great. Dogs do thrive off of schedule. Making sure that there's predictability in their environment can be very helpful for a dog. Um, but where they get confused is when I say I want your dog to have predictability, it's less about making sure you're on schedule with your dog and more about when you go for a walk, is there any standard of behavior? Are you making sure your dog is healing? Is there any standard of how to react to other dogs and cars? If you're out in public, is there any predictability to when you're, checking out at PetSmart? If you bring your dog, are you having your dog sit or are they just jumping around and looking at everybody and sniffing everybody else's stuff? When they eat, are you making them wait before they can eat from the bowl? So having predictability of behavior within things that your dog does throughout the day is super helpful, and honestly a lot easier if your dog understands that there is going to be an expectation of behavior. So in little things like the food, if you put the dog food down, make your dog wait before you release them and say, okay, good boy, go eat or whatever. Making sure that your dog understands that there are expectations of behavior, even on little things. So let's say you're calling me because your dog's reactive on walks. Obviously, you're calling me because you don't quite know how to curtail that for your dog. But in other aspects of their life, easier things, make sure that you're starting some kind of level of expectation for behavior in things that are a daily occurrence. And that's going to help your dog understand the idea of training, the idea of learning. It's no different than us where, we go through school, we go right into college. But what if you took a break between high school and college, right? 5 years or something, and you go back and you're like, man, learning's hard. It's in this state of learning, right? So if you stop learning and you're not in that kind of environment, it's going to be a lot harder to get back into it. So if we can help our dogs understand a level of, hey, we're going to be learning, then when we start training, it's going to be a lot easier for your dog.
Right. That's a great perspective that, you related it to real life for individuals like us. And so that's, I think, very helpful. Is there anything else that you would like to leave with people about training or what you do or anything in general that you think they should know that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think a lot of it honestly comes down to research of breed. I have a lot of clients who work 10-hour days and they have a German Shepherd or a Lab. And of course, your dog is alone with no, exercise or mental exercise as well. And then they come home and their house is destroyed or their dog's pulling on the leash and all of that. And so it's like if you're going to be working a lot, get a dog who can be home for quite some time by themselves that don't need that kind of stimulation. Or I get a client who's like, man, I want to go hiking and play, fetch with my pug. I'm like, that's not going to happen. So like your pug will die if you try to do all that. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of issues, sometimes not always, but a lot of the time, it could have been avoided, whatever these clients are dealing with, if they had got a breed that was better suited for their lifestyle. So, if people are thinking about getting a dog, if you already have a dog and you're having issues, seek out a trainer. But if you're thinking about getting a dog, honestly, a lot of it could be solved by just realistically saying, what do you want this dog for? And making sure that you get a breed that coexists with that. And not being like, oh, well, I'm going to get a Lab because I want to start running. You're not already in the habit of running. So a lot of times you get this Lab, maybe you do it for a little while, but then you stop and now you've got a 6-month-old Lab who's off the walls. Mm-hmm. So be realistic in your lifestyle that you do have, and make sure that you research breeds and that you're getting a dog that makes sense for you and your family.
Yeah, that's so important. I think so many people are set on the idea of this is the dog that I want, and they're not really considering how that fits in. And, apart from just like your own frustration when it gets to be frustrating and you come home and they're all high energy and everything, but to accommodate their needs as well, because like you say, they want to be out, they want to be working, they need to release the energy somehow. So that's very important. I think a really good thing for people to keep in mind. So thank
Yeah.
you for doing that. And thank you so much for talking with us today. I think we covered a lot of really great stuff. If anybody is interested or wants to learn more, needs dog training, reach out to Lindsay at Divine Canine Ranch. I will link all of their information down below. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us again. And everybody else, I'll see you in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.